Sick of getting blisters? Stop slipping and just be comfortable with Pure Grip Socks Pro. Great fit, great comfort, lots of grip, and an even better price. Available now at puregripsocks.com.
While it has its audience, I think most people would agree with me in saying that the Copa Sense line from Adidas, whether it's the 0.1 or the Plus, isn't the greatest example of what a modern leather football boot can be, with that category being dominated by the Nike Tiempo in the Legend 9 Elite. And it seems like Adidas themselves agree with me, because inside this box is a pair of football boots that they're releasing to directly compete against the Tiempo down to the exact dollar. Because for the same $230, instead of a Legend 9 Elite, you can buy this football boot right here, the Adidas Copa Icon. According to Adidas, a modern interpretation of the classic Copa Mundial, featuring a kangaroo leather upper that's been tweaked for the modern game, and a modern sole plate, specifically the torsion frame last seen on the Adidas Nemesis 18 from 4 years ago. Here's the thing. They are chunky. Okay, maybe that's not the right word. They're thick, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, and depending on what you're looking for, it might be the greatest thing ever, because I don't think there's any other football boot quite like this currently available. But what I want to go over is, of course, all the details of the boot and ultimately conclude how they compare to the Nike Tiempo Legend 9 Elite, which you can get for the same amount of money, and of course, how do they compare to a classic Copa Mundial that you can still get for just 150 bucks. We're going to be going over all of that, including how they fit and feel on feet. So if you're interested in learning more, please stick around. And if you're interested in a pair for yourself, you can pick them up below their normal retail price by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes by checking out the first link down below. And really quickly, if you guys enjoy the content, drop a like on the video and make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you haven't already, so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2022. First things first, I do want to quickly address the price, because at $230, that's actually on the less expensive end of top-end football boots these days. However, I do think they're a little bit more expensive than they should be for 3 reasons in particular. Reason number 1 is where they're made. The classic Copa Mundial for 150 bucks is still made in Germany. This pair, however, is made in Indonesia, which I can only assume would be less expensive than making them in Germany. That cost should be reflected in the price tag. Unfortunately, it's not. Also, in comparison to that $150 classic Copa Mundial, $80 less than these, the quality of the leather is better on the OG, and the amount of leather you get on the OG is more significant in that the tongue as well as the midfoot area, for a few different reasons, some positive, some negative, are not made from leather. So you're getting less leather and a lower quality take of kangaroo leather compared to the original for $80 more. I don't necessarily think that's justified. And then finally, the sole plate. It's the torsion frame taken from what was last seen on the Adidas Nemesis 18 football boots that came out 4 years ago. So they definitely save money on development in that they didn't actually develop anything new. They're not paying for new molds. And while there's nothing wrong with taking an older sole plate and putting it on a newer football boot, I think the price tag should reflect that. So the fact that these are $80 more than a regular Copa Mundial, I don't think is necessarily justified. But let me know what you think. And just to once again touch on the quality, you can see here on the right boot on the lateral side, some of the stitching just isn't pulled very tight, and that long term likely isn't going to end up very well. For 230 bucks, given what you can get for 150, I just expect a little more. As for the fit, feel, and performance of the Copa Icon, there's some things you might like and there's some things you might hate depending on personal preference. The upper itself is made from kangaroo leather. You can see that spans the entirety of the forefoot toe box area. It runs up the side where the lace holes are positioned, but then through the midfoot, you can see that you have leather stripes in gold, but the perforated section running through those stripes, as well as this area here along the side of the ankle, is pretty clearly a synthetic leather material, which again, is not a bad thing. It's actually nice to have some synthetic material through the midfoot for the sake of reinforcement and just making the boots feel more secure on your feet. I think that this synthetic material they chose actually mimics the softness of leather pretty nicely from a comfort as well as a touch perspective, so I don't really have any issues with that. However, this upper is incredibly padded. It is the puffer coat of football boots, which I guess are currently in style. I don't quite understand why. However, they just are very, very heavily padded and kind of bulky, both in terms of feel as well as in in terms of looks, which you will see during the on-feet portion of the video. You can actually see some referees rocking a custom black and white variation of this football boot in the 2022 World Cup, which is kind of a weird way of debuting a football boot that it looks like they're going to try to use to compete against the very popular Nike Tiempo series. But I think that's the one strike for it or strike against it when compared to the Nike Tiempo, and that they're just kind of bulky. The touch is great, super padded, really, really soft. The kangaroo leather, while not as good as the OG Copa Mundial, still feels really nice, and once broken in, is super soft. That's going to be the case with just about any kangaroo leather. However, I just think the bulkiness, especially given the fact that this is supposed to be a modern take on the Copa Mundial, I was a little bit surprised in that they feel significantly bulkier on feet than the original Copa Mundial. Obviously, the design and concept of the boot has been kept very simple, which is why you have a standard central lacing system, as well as a refreshingly simple standalone tongue, making putting these on, tying them up, taking them off, just super easy compared to so many football boots out there. And the tongue itself has been kept pretty modern. I would have personally liked to have seen it be leather. However, what they've done here with this kind of mesh base and then a memory foam insert and some fuse over top actually feels really nice. And of course, they eliminated that fold over flap tongue, kind of an iconic element of the classic Copa Mundial, although ultimately an element that just kind of adds bulk and has no real performance benefit. So personally, I don't mind that they've taken it away, even though this is a boot that again does bear the Copa name. Of course, it has the general appearance of a classic Copa Mundial, this being in white and gold, which I don't think we ever got on an OG Copa as a general release. And then you'll see as we get to the back, you have a low cut design, a kind of squared back that again is replicating what you find on the classic Copa Mundial. However, you will find a modern internal plastic heel counter and much more padding through the heel area than a classic Copa would have, lined in this soft microfiber material. It's a little bit on the chunky side and again kind of adds to the overall bulky feel of the football boot, but ultimately the lockdown and comfort through the back of the boot I think is quite nice. And then the insole, fully removable, probably the one element where it looks like they did actually spend some money on tooling. I'm not sure what other footwear this might be found in, but you can see it has this really soft kind of almost suede-like material on the surface, and then it's made from a really thick layer of this white foam. It has the texture that might make it look a little bit like Boost. I can assure you that it's not, but you can see the thickness on the side. It's probably 2.5 times thicker than what you'll typically find on an Adidas football boot, which from an underfoot cushion perspective actually feels really nice. Which brings us to the base of the football boot, where if you had a pair of Nemesis 17 or 18s, whether it was the 0.1 or the Plus, you'll be very familiar with this torsion frame sole plate and FG layout. The torsion frame itself is relatively flexible through the forefoot. It's pretty much straightforward plastic, a little bit of kind of an angled stiffener bar through the middle. So it's kind of promoting that twisting movement, which I don't necessarily think you feel all that much with this sole plate, but nonetheless, it works and feels much more modern and certainly less bulky than what you'll find from a classic Copa Mundial. And then of course the studs, instead of being round like they'd be on a regular Copa, you kind of get this half moon or half circle shape, kind of hybrid between a conical and a blade to the studs themselves, which I would say is on the aggressive side, certainly more so than what you're going to find from the classic Copa. But ultimately, because it's in that traditional Adidas layout where you have the 4 in the heel, the 6 in the forefoot, and the 1 support stud in the middle, if you've worn a pair of Adidas football boots in the last 10 to 12 years, you kind of know what to expect here. Again, not that this is bad in any way, but if the budget only allowed for them to recycle an older sole plate design, I don't know why they wouldn't have taken the one last seen on the Copa 18.1 that featured conical studs, which I think is more Copa-like, just as aggressive in terms of traction in comparison to this, and also just lighter in terms of the overall construction. Speaking of which, how much do they weigh? Is the Copa Icon lighter or at least the same weight as the Tiempo Legend 9 Elite for the exact same price tag? Well, both in the same size, 9.5 US. We'll start off with the Tiempos. You can see that they weigh in at 7.45 ounces, the equivalent of 211 grams, which is actually much lighter than I think most people would expect. And honestly, just a really light pair of football boots in general. We'll throw on the Copa Icon, and you can see that they weigh in at 8.7 ounces, the equivalent of 246 grams, which is quite a significant difference. Not to say that these are heavy, but the Tiempos feel significantly lighter, With that said, if you are comparing this to a classic Copa Mundial, these are about 2 ounces lighter, which is definitely significant and very noticeable. However, toe-to-toe with its main competitor for the same price, they're simply not as light. On feet, I think it's pretty clear to see how chunky the Copa Icon is. I really can't think of anything else that's come out recently, or maybe even in the last 10 years, that is quite as bulky as these football boots are. There's just so much extra padding, particularly through the midfoot, where granted, I am a little bit on the flat-footed side. My feet are pretty average in terms of width, but they just feel and look gigantic on my feet. There is so much padding through the midfoot, it just doesn't feel right. And I guess if I had to compare it to any other football boot out there, it kind of reminds me of some of the Copa Gloro models. However, just with way more padding and way more bulk pretty much all the way throughout. The kangaroo leather through the forefoot and toe box area is super soft and obviously very padded against your feet, so no complaints there in terms of comfort. Lots of extra padding through the heel area as well, like I talked about earlier, and the Nemesis sole plate underfoot feels pretty normal. It's flexible to go along with the softness and I guess lack of stiffness that you're going to find from this upper. But again, I think it really is looking down at your feet and just the general amount of padding that these have compared to anything else that you're either going to absolutely love or absolutely hate. I do think it is a little bit interesting, however, to say that this is a modern take on a classic Copa, but then also have the boot be twice as bulky as a classic Copa would be. So that I think is kind of a little bit interesting and probably not the direction I would have gone in, but maybe this is what Adidas wanted. From a width perspective, they're actually not super wide through the midfoot, which is interesting. They actually pinch pretty heavily directly in the middle of the football boot, but of course are going to stretch through the forefoot and toe box area with that kangaroo leather upper. I would say if you have wide feet, these are probably going to work for you, but I definitely don't think they're as wide as a classic Copa Mundial would be, just given the shape that they've gone for here. It is a little bit unusual, and I honestly think that if the materials used weren't as soft as they were, these football boots would actually be very uncomfortable. So something to keep in mind, just a really unusual shape. And then as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing these in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length seems to be perfect. So if you are looking to order a pair for yourself, unlike a classic Copa Mundial, which kind of has some weird sizing, these ones run true to size. So in conclusion, and hear me out on this one, if it were between the Copa Icon or nothing, I would be very happy to play in these football boots because in a lot of ways, I really like them. However, given the option of options, I can't say I would pick them over the Nike Tiempo, certainly for the same price, and I can't say I would pick them over the classic Copa Mundial for $80 less. I guess there's an argument to be made that if you wanted a pair of football boots that prioritized protection, there is arguably a little bit more protection than the Tiempo Legend 9 equivalent. Or if you just like a really bulky fitting and feeling football boot, then these might be the ones for you. But other than those two reasons, I just don't see why the Copa Icon needs to exist, or at the very least, who it's actually for.